There can be situations where you have the feeling that you're in the wrong movie, like you've lost connection to real life. And today's talk is about how do I reconnect again to real life. And my thesis will be that many of us these days are at risk of losing contact to real life and even losing grip of reality itself. That maybe we as a whole society risk losing contact to reality. In recent years, a few movies have come out that had to do with space travel. Movies like Interstellar, The Martian, or Gravity. Has anyone seen those films? So there's a scene that really stuck with me, I think from Gravity. An astronaut has to go outside to fix something on the spaceship, and she loses contact to the spaceship. Then she floats away, could also be a guy, not sure. They float out into space. And this idea to be unbound without grip or limits sounds amazing at first. Like the German song says, completely detached from the earth, the spaceship floats weightless. But if you think about it, in the long run it's a problem to float through space, because space is an inhospitable place. And I'd like to use this image of no gravity as a metaphor to describe that I see us at risk of losing contact with reality.
Wo wir in Gefahr sind, in der heutigen Zeit den Kontakt zur Realität zu verlieren.
Now, if we talk about reality, we have to first take a little thought history lesson. Because in the last 200 to 250 years, we have changed our connection to reality radically. One image that used to be self-evident, I'll call it old, has lost its believability. And you could describe this image of reality in the following way. Out there in reality, there are all things, like mountains or elephants or houses. These are things that exist. And then there's humans like us. And we humans are in contact with reality. So reality has an impact on us. And the first thing you could say is, of course, this reality is around before we observe it. It's older than us.
Also die Realität, die ist schon älter als wir sozusagen, die ist schon da. Die entsteht.
It doesn't just come into being when we think about it. It's not that we think about something and it then shows up. Instead, you could say, we don't make reality, we find reality. And we find it in such a way that we not only think about it or feel it, but we find it as a reality we ourselves are caught up in with body and soul. Makes sense. If I walk to the mountain, then I could hit my head on it. I'm involved in this real world with body and soul. So I can feel it. And I am there with my body. And as a part of this real world, there are interesting things. Beings, like other people. I'll draw a face right there. I don't just fall into reality out of nowhere. I just exist now. But I am born into it, into a network of relationships, for example, of my parents. They were there before me, and maybe they're siblings or other people. And if I, for example, have a little sister, and she had a toy elephant, let's pretend this is a toy elephant. If I took it away from her, she might cry. That means I learn right away that there are rules in the real world and I have certain responsibilities. Other people have expectations of me. And so my contact to reality is, from the beginning, an ethical connection. Ethical from the Greek word ethos. So there's do's and don'ts. I have to act a certain way. And this image I just described as the old image has philosophically become less important in the last 250 years. It's not completely gone, but kind of was pushed in the background. And instead another idea came up. I'll call it a new image. It's not that the old one is completely gone, but in the new image, it's not so much about how the world out there impacts me, but reality starts more with myself. Very famous the words of Descartes, cogito ergo sum, I think therefore I am. That is, if I want to find out what is really true, I have to look inside myself. Meanwhile, this idea went from philosophy to all areas of life. For us, it's like the water a fish swims in and no longer is aware of. It comes out in sentences like, what's true or false? You have to find that out. Whatever feels right to you. What is the meaning of life? You can only find the meaning of life for yourself. What's right or wrong? Everyone has to figure that out for themselves. Maybe there's also my truth and your truth. The idea is there is no objective beauty, but beauty is in the eye of the beholder. I find inside myself the compass for my life. In this view, it would make total sense that your family minister Lisa Pau says what gender a person is cannot be determined from the outside. The idea is the main thing to know about me is inside of me. There's a lot of truth to this image, and it can also be helpful. Because reality isn't an abstract thing, but of course it's also always my reality. To see the individual in view has a freeing part to it. It has to do with autonomy, that you're more than a cog in a machine. If I'm in pain, the pain isn't out there, but I have it inside me. So there's a lot of truth to this image, but it also has a flip side. And the first flip side is this. If you expect from the individual to have answers to so many huge questions all by myself, that is actually quite exhausting. So to say you have not only find out what job to do. In Germany, I think you can choose between 20,000 fields of studies. That decision is hard enough. But now you're supposed to also figure out what the meaning of life is, what reality is, what your identity is, and all is supposed to be just in you. I think this concept tends to be overwhelming, or at least exhausting. Maybe it's one of the reasons why we have so much burnout in our society, where actually everyone feels so overwhelmed, especially young people. Well, if I have to figure out everything all by myself, it becomes very, very tiring. The second issue is that it isn't a mindset that makes you happy. There seems to be a psychological connection between introspection, so thinking about yourself, and sadness. In the old Greek myth of Narcissus, we are told this story. I don't know if you are familiar. There's this handsome boy, Narcissus, and he's looking for the greatest beauty in the world. And one day he sees the most beautiful thing there is. namely his own mirror image. He sees it in a pond or a lake, and he falls in love with his own image, and he stares at it deeper and deeper, and he gets so close that he falls in the water and finally drowns in it. And the tragic part of it is that there's actually someone who loves Narcissus, namely the nymph Echo. But he has no room for Echo in his mind, because he is only thinking of himself. I think this ancient story carries part of human knowledge, that we humans, when we revolve around ourselves, we become depressed. It doesn't make us happy, but we might become more like that astronaut, out in space, floating around, but without a foundation. Now, if I look inside myself and expect solutions to come from there, then there's something in me that gets a high value, and that is my feelings. Youth often say, "I feel you." I put that as a title of one of my talks where it's about general topics of humanity first, and in the end it's about God. And a young person commented, "There's some good points in here, but I don't feel religion so much." Makes sense. If you don't feel much around religion, then it has no meaning to you, because you're supposed to feel something. Let me now say a few words about feelings. First of all, your connection to your emotions is so important. There are people who are all in their heads, only brain. And there's people who are so distracted from the outside and other people that they aren't in touch with their own feelings. So connection to your emotions is important, but it's not the full truth. Of course, it's elementary to feel, but feelings are only a part of the whole. Let me unpack that for you. Because this view of reality, to focus on feelings, to value them highly, tends to emphasize this too much. And I want to develop an argument with you why feelings are a great thing, but can't be the compass for your life. Why? Why can't you say, "I'll just do what I feel like"? I think there are 4 important reasons. The first big reason is, a feeling is only a snapshot. At the dentist you have pain, but your tooth won't hurt forever. And if you're sad, you will usually not stay sad forever. We know that. A feeling gives important impulses for your experience right now, but it's only a snapshot of the moment. Also, the sentence, "just do what you feel like," is a bad compass, because your emotions contradict themselves. This morning when I was in bed, I felt pretty tired. I could have obeyed that feeling and stayed in bed, but then there was another feeling, the feeling of hunger. That drives me to go to the kitchen and eat something. Maybe there's a third feeling of responsibility, that I should maybe go to work. To say "just do what you feel like" is like saying "just do what people say." Which people? You have those different emotions in you who contradict themselves. The third issue with focus on emotion may not be so obvious at first, but feelings have the potential to tune out the you. Kind of like self-indulgent Narcissus, who couldn't hear the voice of Echo anymore because he only thought of himself. Because your feeling is your feeling. It could be completely wrong. You could say, "I feel offended by you," but that doesn't mean that somebody really insulted you. Feelings are feelings. And to act based on feelings could also mean that we no longer see the other person, the you. And finally, If you only revolve around yourself and your feelings, well, feelings are ultimately easy to manipulate. Some people are quite good at that anyway, so to blackmail people emotionally, gaslighting is what you might call that. But advertisement does the same thing, and political propaganda also does that. It appeals to your feelings. This person who revolves around themselves is easy to manipulate. You could even say a bit harshly, they are the perfect henchmen of an ideology. Or in modern language, the perfect customer, who always wants whatever ads try to sell them. Now, we could maybe agree that this lifestyle we see right here at least can't be the full truth. At first, it can feel great to float like an astronaut in an endless void without walls, free to do whatever is authentic to myself. But really, the longer you think about it, imagine a room where there are no walls, an endless space. But imagine that the room is dark. Then it becomes quite frightening, because you can't hold on to anything. We live in times where some people question if a wall even exists, that there is such a thing as reality, that there is even such a box where we move around in. You don't believe me? I'll give you examples. We live in a generation where you can question almost anything. Is there good and evil? Well, in some cultures this way, others that way. Is man more than another animal? Well, you can't really say that. 2 + 2 is 4. Well, there are alternative mathematical systems where that might be different. What can we agree on? Can we agree with the old saying by Descartes, I think, therefore I am? No, Yuval Noah Harari says the ego is an illusion, just a mental software that plays on my biological computer, so I don't really exist. Then there isn't a really free will either. I can't decide what I'll say because I'm just a machine. What is there then at all? Is there a reality at all? Are we just living in a simulation? We clearly have nothing certain left. And I call this state loss of reality. And I think we as a society are affected by this more and more, saying that there is no objective reality, or at least we have no access to it. And of course, digitalization encourages that trend. Here I can even give myself a new face. It encouraged me to revolve around me, have a face that looks like a cat. How cute! An augmented reality, supposedly even richer than real reality. And I can do all sorts of things. But I have bad news for you. Real reality doesn't care about that. The real world is the wall you run into when you chase an illusion too long. The sun doesn't care if you believe in it. You may say, but I don't feel the sun. Well, you don't feel it, but it's still there. It's reality. And sooner or later, we all come in contact with reality. You know, just because something means well or feels good doesn't mean it's right or true. That goes for each of us personally. A friend of mine recently told me that she spoke to a lady who runs a hospice, a place where people spend their last days. And she said, you can tell how someone lived by how they die. And she also said, if you want to know how someone lived, watch who comes to their deathbed. In dying, all illusions break, and you see which life has true substance. but also politically. Just because as a society an idea feels good, everyone says, wow, that's a great idea, doesn't mean that it will really work. No, I don't mean current political stances in European countries. But you can chase all sorts of grand ideas, yet they don't work in real life. But we live in times where even to say there is an objective truth, or there is good and evil, that already sounds intolerant. Isn't it much more tolerant to say, hey, everyone has a different opinion? But look, if you and several people are standing up on a cliff, high up, then it's true that the cliff is high. And it's good for you to say this cliff is high. Why is it good? Why is it good to tell the truth? Well, if someone jumps because you said before the height of the cliff is a matter of opinion, then you cause damage. And we live in times that say, just jump, whatever works for you. Could be true that you can even fly. But that's not loving. Actually, it's true what the late professor of philosophy said a few years ago, Robert Spähmann. Good is the deed that does reality justice. Good is not just the deed that means well. Good is the deed that does reality justice. And I will argue that we actually need such a thing as the framework or foundation in which we live. So, question: what stops us from losing contact to reality? What prevents us from losing that grip? With the astronaut, it's clear. The astronaut that lands on a planet, just like all of us, by the way, in case you were confused, and gravity. The mass of the planet keeps him on the ground. That is what prevents me from floating off. It's the weight of the planet itself. And the interesting thing is, the weight of the planet is greater than my own. I need something that weighs more than myself in order to keep me grounded. And I believe one thing that prevents us from losing grip on reality, where we only trust feelings and ideas, is, among other things, a new connection to our body. The body is more than just our physical muscles. It's a living unit between body, soul, and spirit. And I think the more we are digital, moving around in virtual space, the more we need access to our human body, our literal mass or weight. Literally, there's something about our body that grounds us, brings us back from our illusion. Or as the late philosopher Ferdinand Ulrich said, the body of a human connects them to the here and now and takes away from his self-glorious need to be everywhere. Here I am nowhere and I don't commit anywhere. I remain an unconnected, floating thing. Yet the body is here and now. And that's why the contact to your body, to nature, the things we can touch, physical touch, and forms of spiritual expression, where we honor the body, are a helpful treasure to be rediscovered. The physical life. Hugs, what we noticed during COVID, audio and visual alone over Zoom, etc., are missing a fundamental dimension of real life.
Have you noticed there are no ads on this channel? This is the only one. There's one reason for that. This channel is funded by donations only. If you want to help us to continue with this work, you find everything about supporting us below in the description. Now enjoy the rest of the video.
The second thing that helps us from drifting off, I won't say much about because many other places talk about it. We need the analog world. In virtual times, we need to rediscover analog things and train them like a muscle. We need the analog as a counterweight. Okay, now I want to talk about a third thing. We humans are not just inhabitants of a physical universe. So we don't just live in a world with mountains and rivers and stars, but there are also these other things around us, namely other people. And a person who stands next to me, another human facing me, can rip me out of my self-revolving thoughts. Unless I'm like Narcissus, completely tuning out everyone else, but normally, as a you standing across from me, you can call me out. It starts even if you walk down the streets and someone cries help, you would help them. Unless, of course, you have headphones on and can't hear it, which happens a lot these days. But overall, if someone calls, you pay attention to them. If a baby cries, you stop philosophizing and get back to the here and now. And this ability of a person, of humans, to enter with their weight into another person's life, with meaning in our life.
Mit Bedeutung in unser Leben zu treten, für diese Eigenschaft.
For this ability, the Hebrew Old Testament had an interesting word, and the word is kavod or kabod.
Kavod oder kabod.
Kabod is mostly translated as glory in the Old Testament. But it actually comes from a verb called kavad. And kavad means to have weight, to be heavy. We Germans also have an expression to be a person of weight, meaning to be important. Kabod is this weight of a person to enter your life where you realize, okay, I can't just treat you like any other thing. But now there's a problem. We have all sorts of people in our life who have different weight. It could be that there's one person who doesn't want good things for you at all. They could even be a tyrant who wants you only to do what they do. And who among these people carries the most weight? Who has the most glory? The Old Testament treads an interesting path in this. If you study ancient Mesopotamian or Egyptian religion, who has the most weight? Of course, the Pharaoh in all his glory, or the Assyrian king. But the Old Testament is quite bold to say no human has the greatest kabod. Also, no thing, no idol, no object has the greatest kabod. Rather, it's important to recognize the one who truly has the greatest weight, who is the sun in our solar system. And I'll summarize this idea in this sentence. Worship orders reality. Worship sounds so religious, like lighting a candle or bowing a knee, but I mean something quite normal and profoundly human. Namely the question, what in your life has the greatest weight? In life, there's something that has the most weight, or to say it like the Hebrews did, the most glory.
Herrlichkeit, Gewicht oder Herrlichkeit.
When the Bible says God is glorious or glorify God, that's old religious terms we hardly even understand today. In plain terms, it means recognize that you, Mr. Meyer, are maybe going to live 80 years and then you will die. You didn't create yourself and can't produce a single molecule around you in the whole universe. Recognize that you are anything but God. And recognize that this highest kabod, the highest weight, the highest glory belongs to God. Only then will something like order enter your life. There is a third principle apart from body and the analog, and it has to do with acknowledging the glory of God and that He is worthy of praise. And I believe it gives us a framework and foundation in reality. I call it the ordering of reality. You may say now, Hartl, you and your religious stuff, we live in the 21st century. Why does anyone have to worship anything? It seems an odd concept. In this picture on the left, who or what has the most kabod, the most glory? Who makes the rules? If in Egypt it was the Pharaoh and the great king, who is God in that? Answer, God is here. Modernity hasn't gotten rid of God. They just made the individual into a God. We don't live in a non-religious times. We are totally religious. Only now I myself am God. Not the Assyrian king, not God in heaven, but my own little ego. Mr. Meyer himself is God and can choose what is right or wrong, good and bad. If he feels like it, then it must be true. The only problem is reality is the wall you run into when you chase an illusion long enough. Why is it wrong that I am my own God? That I am the highest measure of things? If I am my own highest standard and the real world does something I don't like, which it does sometimes, then I have to fight that reality. If something doesn't fit my plans, when I get emotionally upset, or as they say today, triggered, then I must fight against it. And we are becoming a culture that is more and more afraid of offending people. What you say might be true, but it could hurt someone's feelings. Oh, well, if it hurts someone's feelings, we can't say it. Because if reality goes against my feelings, then reality has to bow. The Bible has an interesting word that means the fear of the Lord. It's very old-fashioned to talk about this, but it shows up in the Old Testament several times. In the Psalms and the book of Proverbs, you can read the sentence, "The fear of the Lord is the beginning of wisdom." In short, wisdom is not just being smart, because smart people can do horrible bad things. Wisdom has to do with coming to a good judgment on reality, to find a good lifestyle in your life. So here it says the fear of the Lord. But what does that mean? Are we to be afraid of God now? The Hebrew word for fear doesn't have as much to do with panic, but more like, I'm standing at the top of a cliff and come to the right understanding that the cliff is high. So the fear of the Lord is not about being afraid of God, but to recognize, wait a minute, I might live 80 years. He is infinite and everlasting and made everything. Okay, I recognize my place. And here it says, the fear of the Lord, the attitude of acknowledging God, is the beginning of wisdom. Or you could say in a picture, it becomes an anchor that holds you in reality. And without this anchor, we lose all stability. It is described, this anchor is described as the fear of the Lord. Because the fear of the Lord is the beginning of wisdom, if that's true, then the opposite must also be true. then you must say to lose sight of God is the beginning of losing sight of reality, or the beginning of insanity or stupidity, whatever you may call the opposite of wisdom. To ignore God is to lose grip on reality. I want to read a quote to you from an author I find very funny. I need to show you the picture because he is someone who has kabod in all senses. A lot of weight. C.K. Chesterton was literally a heavy man. He loved wine and cigars, which already makes him endearing to me and a funny contemporary. And he writes at one point on the last pages of his book, Heretics, "The great march of mental destruction will come. There will come a day where you will question the existence of the cobblestones in the street, and it will be a religious dogma to believe in them. People will draw swords at the argument whether or not the leaves are green in the summer. The faithful will no longer have to defend the invisible world, but the existence of the visible universe. We will look to the invisible grass and the blue sky, and a never understood courage will fill our hearts." Chesterton says there will come a day when we question if 2 + 2 = 4. Chesterton says there will come a day when we question if the grass is green. Do you know when he wrote that? 1908. The Bible says you order reality by setting your heart on God. That becomes the ground on which humanity can stand. The interesting thing is how the Bible describes the opposite. The Bible condemns in many places, especially in the Old Testament, the worship of idols. Now you could ask, what is it with the Bible and idols? Who today worships Zeus or Artemis or Baal? The interesting thing is, again, what the word idol actually means in Hebrew. Elilim, the idol. It's a combination of El and the plural Elim, so gods. But Elil in Hebrew also means nothing. Martin Buber translates Elilim as God-nothings. But you could also translate idol with nothingness. It means your heart anchor, if the anchor on reality is set on anything other than God. It is long-term built on nothing. The gods of the pagans are nothing, but the Lord made the heavens, so the psalm. Now today we live in a world that doesn't so much worship Baal or Artemis, but we find it so important what someone has and what others say about you, your good reputation. But if we take the Bible seriously, then to set our heart on material things or opinions of people is nothingness. Meaningless in the sense that you keep none of it at your deathbed. None of it will become fruitful in the next generation. A society that builds on that will slip into nothingness. It brings no good fruit. It ends in nothingness. I hope I could convince you that we'd rather not live that way. Okay, that was the problem. Now let's try to find the solution. So, what's the alternative? I first have bad news for you. To merely know that there is an anchor is not enough. In the New Testament, there's a book called Hebrews. In it, the author thinks about the exodus of Egypt. You know the story. Israel leaves their slavery from Egypt. And God starts to speak to them. The author of Hebrews says the problem they have is they heard everything, the words of God, but it didn't do them much good. Why didn't it do them good? He says that the word did not do them any good because it didn't connect by faith with their hearts.
mit den Hörern verband. Ein bisschen auspacken, das ist schwierig. Die Vorstellung
I need to unpack that a little. Here we go. The concept is that the true thing is said, but can bounce off you. It may not hit you if it doesn't connect with your heart by faith. So the idea is obvious that faith is somehow like a connection to this anchor. And this anchor in turn grounds you in reality. These days we tend to think that faith is not knowing anything, that is abstract. But that's far removed from the classical definition in Christian theology. The wonderful Jewish Christian philosopher Edith Stein writes in her last book that the greatest danger of believing people is the heart going numb. Be like, heard it before, sure, always the same thing. And she says, just like Thomas of Aquinas, whom she quotes, that faith is a sensory organ. Just like we get information about the material world through our physical senses. I can look at you, I can touch a hot or a cold item. So we can see supernatural things through faith. Faith is not wishful thinking, but a sensory organ through which we see spiritual reality and through which spiritual reality can enter our hearts. You could also put it simply, faith activates the spiritual reality. So the spiritual reality is already there. I'm not making it up, but by faith it becomes active in me. But what exactly becomes active? And what is the goal of all this? The goal of it is described in Ephesians. Again, the same metaphor of being grounded and anchored. Here it says, by faith, Christ dwells in our hearts. By faith, Christ lives in our hearts. And for what? So that you are rooted and grounded in love. I find this image incredibly beautiful, that the grounding in reality isn't cold and boring. But it's carried by a foundation of love, which I can be grounded and rooted in with my life. That's the goal of it all. It's not about locking you up in a box of that's how it is. But God wants to root you in a grounded reality where love is the carrying foundation. Recently, a very interesting German author passed away called Sibylle Levitscharow. And she starts one of her poetry lectures with the following sentence. I love it, it's beautiful. She says, "The moment we are called by our name, our self, wandering in the vagueness, immediately returns to us. When called by our name, we are touched in the most inner substance which holds us together." Let me unpack that sentence a little. It's not like we humans are always yelling to have contact to reality. Often we even try to run away from it. It's often more comfortable to make excuses, to hide, to not face it. And this tendency is as old as humanity itself. In the Bible, there's the story of the Garden of Eden, where Adam and Eve realize they are naked, so they try to hide from God, because they don't want to face reality as they are. Because they think, I'm not accepted and loved this way, so I'd rather hide. And this fear we all know. Everyone has the tendency to hide. And Sibylle Levitscharow says, the thing to call us back is when someone calls us by our name. If your name is Ingrid and someone shouts Ingrid, even if they mean someone else, you immediately feel called upon. And I find it so moving that in the Garden of Eden, God also goes looking for Adam and he calls, Adam, where are you? Human, where are you? I feel like God to this day is looking for humanity. Where have you gotten yourself lost to? Where are you? Where are you hiding? But in us is this fear, a voice that calls our name and judges us. One that tries to put us in a box to force their will on us, but doesn't have good intentions. We can see how it really is in the last story of the Gospel of John. Last chapter 22. It's about Peter. He was a chief apostle. The story is quickly told. Simon is a simple fisherman at the Sea of Galilee. One day Jesus says, "Follow me, and I will make you a fisher of men." And Simon thinks, wow, I'm someone special. And Jesus even gives him a new name, Peter. Peter comes from the word Petra, which means rock, so a rock of a man. In modern way, maybe rocky. And Rocky also acts like a rock he would. He always has grand ideas, and Rocky is very confident of himself. Once Jesus says, "Bad news, you will betray me." And he says, "Of course, everyone else will, but not me. You can count on me." And this same Rocky, this Peter, fails at the first test. On the very night where Jesus is arrested, he denies Jesus 3 times in a stupidly harmless situation when a servant girl asks, "Aren't you one of them too?" And then he denies Jesus 3 times. Now Jesus is risen from the dead. I don't know how Peter feels, but if I had betrayed my friend in an important moment, I would not be happy to see that friend again. I don't know what is going on in Peter's head, but we read in the book of John that he says, "I'll go fishing." What? You'll go fishing? Jesus called you away from being a fisherman. But Peter says it's over. I'll go back to my old job. I'll run away. I don't think Peter lost his faith in Jesus, but he surely lost his faith in himself. And so he starts fishing. And the sad thing is, he doesn't even catch anything. It's like a drug dealer who gets saved and then has a relapse as a drug dealer, but nobody will buy his stuff. So it's going real bad for Peter. Maybe unfitting comparison, but okay. Everyone tells based on their experience. Just kidding. And Peter is out there fishing, but catches nothing. And then he sees Jesus, and the other says, "It's Jesus." And he swims towards him. So here's Jesus at the Sea of Galilee and made a fire. Look, while you were out all night on the water, wet because you swam to shore, a warm fire is a wonderful thing. And here there's even breakfast. Jesus even made breakfast for his betrayer. And I imagine Peter thinking, whoa, sooner or later he'll ask tough questions. Like if my best friend had betrayed me, I'd also have some questions. Something like, "Simon, you still remember me, right? Interesting, you recognize me again. What were you even thinking? Was she really that scary, that girl? What scared you so much? Oh no, a servant girl." But instead, Jesus asks a question Peter was not expecting. He only asks, "Do you love me?" "What do you mean? I just betrayed you." Peter says, "Yes, I love you." And Jesus says, "Okay, then you're back in the game. Feed my sheep." And he asks the same question 3 times. You know, Jesus isn't deaf there. Say it again so I hear you. Why does he ask 3 times? It's not like he wants to rub it in where it hurts, like, "Ha, you denied me 3 times, right?" But I think each time Peter denied Jesus, something broke inside Peter. And each time Peter said out loud, "Jesus, you know all things, okay? You know I'm a failure, but you also know I love you." That heals something of that reality inside of Peter. And Jesus calls him back to the beginning, even literally.
Sogar buchstäblich.
At this very lake, Jesus' story with him began.
Zwischen Jesus und ihm begonnen. Und weißt du, wie Jesus
And do you know what he calls him in John 22? He doesn't call him Rocky. He doesn't call him Peter. He calls him Simon, son of John. He calls him by his old name, son of John. I know your parents. I know you are from Capernaum. You're a fisherman. Remember when I called you for the first time? You weren't Rocky then. Either you were not a superstar. The only thing you had was this yes of love to me. And if you have that yes of love again, then I will call you back into this reality. Jesus made a fire for the man who betrayed him at a fire. That's the voice of God that goes looking for Adam in the Garden of Eden, not to kick him down, but to call him back to a reality of love. God's true wish is not to push us in a box. There is something much better to that picture. It's about freedom for the individual, about autonomy, the dignity of each person. But revolving around the self gets us stuck in shame and illusion. And it's the loving voice of God that will call us out and back to reality. In the end, Jesus is all about freedom. The truth of God is not a truth to cage us in and keep us small, but Jesus says you will see the truth, and the truth will set you free. And this also goes for you and me personally, that there is this voice that lovingly calls your name and calls you back and says, welcome to reality. Welcome to the truth that sets you free.